Masterminds have been around for a long time, right? But unless you had a bunch of extra income to throw at it, you couldn't be a part of it. Well, we wanted to solve that problem. And so we're bringing masterminds to you for free. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Mastermind for the Masses. Super excited this week because we're doing something a little bit different, and Colby is stepping outside of the host role into the guest role. We've been doing this podcast for almost 6 months now, and we thought it would be prudent to kind of give you guys a little more insight into who we are. When we started off, right, we thought about doing that, but we figured you'd want to hear what we said before you might care about who we were. So now that we've had a lot to talk about over the 6 months, we thought, hey, let's pull back the curtain a little bit and learn a little bit more. But before we dive into that deep dive with Colby, I do want to throw it over to Shan and see how this week's gone for you, man.
It's going pretty good. I am leaving for Maryland on Thursday, so it's kind of a short week for work. But other than that, same old, same old.
Nice. Doing anything fun up there, or just
there's a festival up there that I'm gonna visit out there for. So I've always wanted to go to Maryland. I feel like that'd be my second go-to state for sure. So
awesome. Well, make sure you have some crab cakes. I think that's the
definitely.
go-to right there. Yeah, awesome. I just got back from traveling this week myself. Had some work travel to do, so that was a nice little trip. But back plugging away at the office. But now we're here, and Colby, I'd be remiss not to ask you how your week was before we dive into questions. So how are things going for you this week, man?
They've been good. Same old, same old. So learning programming pretty regularly throughout the weeks, and then I actually I signed up for like a hockey training thing as well. So I'm doing like the games and everything that I've been doing, but then I actually signed up for someone to kick my ass in like a training session as well. So got that the next couple of weeks. So first one was definitely very tough, but it was so fun.
Awesome, man. Well, you know what they say, pain is weakness leaving the body. That's an old Marine Corps saying that
A
at
lot of
least that's
weakness
where I
must have
first
left
heard
then.
it. A lot of pain. That's awesome. No, man. So I thought about a couple of different questions that I wanted to kick things off with personally, but for me, like I just think it'd be great for everyone to kind of get a little bit of background of where you kind of came from, man. I was watching Inside Out, the movie, right? Which is about all these emotions, and obviously they got the new one coming out. So and one of the things that stuck with me was that little core memory filter. If you haven't seen the movie, it's a cute little one for kids and
I
family.
just
But
watched it last
yeah,
weekend. It's funny.
yeah. So I was thinking, like, what are those milestones, those core memories? Like
Mm.
anything you want to take us through? Because obviously we talk a lot about career and where you are today, but I'm trying to get a little glimpse and insight into, what led Colby to where he is today. So, why is he a big hockey fan? Give us a little bit of background about like Colby 0 to 18, if you will.
Yeah, sure thing. So I was born in North Carolina in Durham. Only lived there for about a year of my life. And then after that, I lived in Maine. My parents got divorced when I was like super young, probably like one. So I have no memories of my parents, ever being together. But they are actually really great as like you know, um, being separated. Like there was no big animosity, so they raised us really well even outside of that. But yeah, so my dad lived in Florida, we lived in Maine, and so I'd kind of visit back and forth with my dad during the summers was kind of what the deal was. And that's where my love of hockey came from is when we moved to Maine. I think I started playing when I was like 4 years old or something like that. Like in terms of learning to skate, you can start pretty young, and the younger you do it, the easier it is to pick up, I think. Um, so did that pretty much year round until we left, which was in fifth grade. So I traveled around. I played travel hockey. So I visited Canada, Massachusetts, Maryland, pretty much any of the northeastern states. Just traveling and playing hockey, primarily goalie. And yeah, I just like grew up as a kid, just having a blast. Like honestly, I think all my major memories in Maine are just playing hockey. And then yeah, I lived up there till fifth grade, and then moved down to Florida to be closer with our dad. So my mom moved down, and stopped playing hockey because it was way too expensive down in Florida because there's very few rinks and you have to travel pretty far, and obviously equipment is still super expensive. That's like the biggest barrier to entry for hockey. And from there, I would say like honestly, my life in Florida was definitely the most formative, I would say, in terms of who I am today, just because obviously like the beginning of your life, like you think you're just enjoying being a kid. And then I think like, especially once you get into like middle school and high school, you have like a lot of good and bad experiences that shape who you are. I think a lot of the times, like at least that's how it was for me. I mean, so in middle school, I played sports. Still in middle school, I played football, I played baseball, um, played basketball a little bit. Um, but then that kind of stopped once I got to high school. I was never like, even though I was super active, I never was really in shape, and I was kind of overweight going into high school. And I didn't love any of the sports enough to really change that side of things. And once you get into high school, you kind of have to make a much larger commitment to being, taking care of yourself physically and all that sort of stuff. And I just didn't love any of the sports enough to do that. But I was a big gamer in middle school, and that definitely continued into current day, and but certainly in high school as well. Yeah, so that's like far as interest wise, like where a lot of that stuff comes from. But yeah, going into high school, from this is kind of like I would say where, I don't know how you guys feel, but I know for me, when I got to high school is when I started to like think like what comes next, right? When you're in middle school, you're just thinking high school comes next and that's it, right? But when you get to high school, it's sort of up in the air. It's just like, for me, it was kind of like, oh, if you're smart enough, you go to college. If you're not smart enough, I don't know, I guess you just figure it out. Like I never really understood what the other option was. That never seemed super clear to me. Um, but even though I was kind of aware of it, I never really thought about it much. I was never really pressured to think about it much, and also didn't really even know how to frame it intellectually, in the sense that like I don't know how I should approach thinking about this thing. And it wasn't until I graduated school, or close to graduation, probably like the last year, my dad approached me and was like talking about you know the fact that like they can help me get through college, etc. But that like it would obviously require me to do really well, and the moment that I start not doing well, I will have to pay for it myself. So it meant nothing less than a B, obviously. And yeah, so it was kind of like at that point I was just like, well, I don't really know what the other options are, and I don't really see a clear path. But at least people kept telling me, well, just get a degree in anything, and you'll at least roughly have what you need to do something in life. So I was like, sure, I'll just do that. But for me, this is probably like the how would I say, like I'm a pretty like driven person once I like decide to do something, and this is probably like the moment in my life where I'm probably actually the most proud of this moment. And it was because I was not like a very intellectual kid. Like I didn't care about my grades like that much. Like I did fine. I got A's and B's. I think one semester I like completely flunked it in high school. But outside of that, I still graduated like a 3.1 or something from high school. But I never really cared. I wasn't like a super studious, like smart student. I was in mostly advanced classes, nothing too crazy though. Um, and yeah, like no one, I don't think anyone even considered to me to be like the smart kid, so to speak, right? Like, um, but like when I went to college, I was like, I'm gonna prove that I'm the smart kid. Essentially, I was like, I'm gonna like destroy college. Like I just had this like vision in my mind that like I think like I almost approached it with like a chip on my shoulder, where it just felt like people didn't think that I could be like that person who was like smart or whatever, and I just wanted to prove to myself that I could. And that's honestly like kind of what I did. I just chose a degree that I found really interesting and engaging, and it ended up being history, in large part due to the professor that uh, I kind of like really got attached to for his courses. And yeah, I graduated with like a 3.8 GPA, I think it was, and like really excelled. Developed a lot of like intangible skills with that degree because I was really pushing myself. So yeah, it wasn't like a super practical degree by any means, but it was at least a degree, and it kind of got me started. And then I mentioned on the podcast before, but from there it was kind of like I still felt lost, honestly. At the end of college, I still felt lost, like going into the world. I was like, okay, I have this history degree. I did really well in school. People said that if I do well in school and I get a degree, there's a lot of opportunities for me. So, what is there? And honestly, like there was really not much, unsurprisingly to me now. And so I just kind of started looking through like what jobs don't require a specific degree and they just require a degree. And it happened to be stuff like, working for enterprise is like a big one that I saw. And then I ended up finding a company called Ryder, which is like a similar boat, except it's not commercial car rentals. It's like, commercial like rental trucks and stuff like that. And, I started working for them and, you know, applied the same principle of just do whatever it is I need to do the best that I possibly can do it. And that led to a promotion to a sales role. Tried to do the same thing there and it just wasn't working out and didn't really go well and I wasn't enjoying it. And that's when I transitioned into the IT space. I
Awesome,
know that
man.
was pretty long-winded. I didn't really know where to go with that, so I wanted to at least give like a broad level overview of, you know, I guess like big moments in my life, like roughly speaking.
Yeah, I don't think it was that long-winded, man. I mean, you just covered, your entire life in all
Yeah.
of, less than 10 minutes. So kudos to that. But, Shan, I know you had some questions you wanted to ask too, man. So I
Yeah,
lobbed the first one. You want to go for number two here?
sure. So I'm approaching it with a little bit what I know about Colby, and what I know about Colby is he thoroughly enjoys gaming, and it's different with Colby than it is. I mean, everyone I know loves the game. I game myself, but Colby welcomes it with a different perspective, and he almost uses it almost as an advantage. So, what I wanted to ask you, in terms of your gaming interest, what game was it that really like transitioned everything for you? And then when did you adopt that like mindset to where, okay, like I'm gonna play games that allow me to strategize and like challenge the way I think and kind of like I don't know. For a lot of people, it's like they step into therapy for gaming, or they just like relax at the end of the day. For you, it's almost like a whole layer of challenges for your life. So one, I want to
Yep.
know what that game was that really like spewed that early on, and then two, like how do you decide which games you want to jump into, or what you want to venture out, or what games you want to buy next, like
Mm.
based off of those core concepts of how you particularly game.
Super interesting question. And I'll tell you first why I love the question, and it's because this may sound strange to a lot of our listeners depending on how into the gaming sphere they are and how much they know about it. But I'm in love with games. I always have been, and I honestly think games have been incredibly helpful for structuring how I think about things and how I solve problems. And it's not too weird when you think about the fact that like life is a game to some extent and the things that you do in life are games and competition is a game structure and how you approach solving problems within a competition to win and how fast you like solve them and like noticing patterns, like it's all very similar. And so like I guess people can use that as a rough to at least grasp like how roughly something like this could happen. But to directly to the question, I would say it was actually Call of Duty probably was the first biggest thing, and it didn't start like I was trying to almost in a sense like express mastery, because I think that's like what ends up happening with me is that like I love games where there's a high skill curve in the sense that like you can get started, but the level it takes to be a master at like the game is incredibly high. So it just takes like an inordinate amount of time or an inordinate amount of dedication to actually reach that apex of achievement within the game. Because I just find the process of just the process of developing mastery, I've always been incredibly addicted to. Like it's such a fun experience and being able to express that like at each level as you're going up. It's just I don't know. I don't know what about my brain is wired to just absolutely love that, but I do. And I think part of it is potentially undiagnosed ADHD because I've heard that one of the things with ADHD people, I guess, is that they do very well when there's immediate feedback. So if you structure things in a way where they can quickly get feedback on something that they've just learned in like a game way, they will do it much faster than someone who doesn't have that sort of thing. Whereas like in a traditional like teaching structure where it's like you learn a bunch of material and you take a test, right? But you don't know the answers until the end after they've graded it. You don't get it after each answer. they do way worse. So it's almost like the problem is delayment of gratification to some extent, and like delaying like matching what you did and the outcome. But so maybe there's something to do with that. But yeah, Call of Duty, it just started off. I just loved the game. I was just like a young kid. I started off playing probably when I was like sixth grade, maybe, I think. Before that, I just kind of played like sports games like NHL and NBA, the NBA games, all that
Do you
sort of
think
stuff.
do you think Call of Duty had a heavy like one of the factors for it being Call of Duty was like the historical element to it? Because I loved that when I was a kid. Like stories, the micro stories on factual like events is what made me like Call. Even though I just love the dynamic of Call of Duty,
Yeah,
but
it could be.
like every year is a different story and a different like kind of perspective or perception on like how that war went or that like
Yeah.
period went. So it
Yeah.
was interesting for sure. But I do think that subliminally might have an effect on you because I know you like history a lot too.
Yeah, I think so. Mainly because I did love the campaigns in my first Call of Duties. Like, so I didn't play Call of Duty until Call of Duty 4. I didn't really play the other ones before that. I mean, granted, that's still a very old Call of Duty for people who, I mean, it's the fourth
Yeah.
game, but it's a very old, I mean, that's like pre 2010 at this point, which
Yeah.
people not may think is old, but for me is like half my life ago, so it's old to me. So yeah, I started playing around then. Yeah, and the campaign's really good. I just found it sort of like the realism with like stuff going on. But I think the gameplay is also just super addicting. Like,
Yeah.
especially the multiplayer facet of it when I got to play multiplayer, because I was always a competitive kid. Like, that's why one of the reasons I love sports and why I love hockey so much is just like I like being able to develop a skill, but then I want to challenge other people in that same skill. Because in a large
Right.
sense, like there's a competitive nature of like you want to see how you match up to people. You want to win essentially. Like you want to be the best. Like it's that drive. Like I said, for mastery, that's all it is for me. Is like I like strive to be the absolute best. And I think that can be very toxic if you're not, considerate of the negatives of it. But
Right.
I think it can also be a very strong motivator and positive thing in your life. But yeah, I think it was just that part. Like it mimics sports in the sense that like because Call of Duty, probably the biggest thing was there was this thing called game battles back in the day, and I don't know if it's still a thing. Yep. And so there was like a global ranking that your profile would get. And when you played games and you won matches, like these sort of like it was like a third party matchmaking system, and then you'd invite people into your lobbies and then play with them, and you could do one-on-ones, you could have a team of 2 people, you could have a team of 4v4, etc. And when I got into that, like that was like exactly like what hockey is, right? It's a team structured like competitive sport essentially. It's just like how good are you versus the other team at like killing them with your characters essentially, right? And there's a ton of mini games, like all the micro skills involved. Like it's very akin to sports, and that's why esports is such a big thing now in some of the major game titles, is because they mimic sports. And I mean, everyone can resonate with loving sports. And it's just like a pretty easy comparison. But yeah, I would say like that definitely. I just fell in love with that. But it wasn't to the point where I didn't make a connection with like the fact that it could be a very useful like life skill development tool. At the time I just loved it. Like I was just like addicted essentially.
Yeah. Well, we kind of grew up being lied to, right? So like
Yeah.
gaming always existed, since like, the 30s and 20s. It's just when the digital revolution came through, like that was really kind of dispelled on everyone as like too addicting and too like eye constraining. And in reality, like you playing Sudoku or, binge watching a TV show or even like reading a book, like in a form of it, it's just changed in the way we do it. And the reason it became addicting is because it's way more dynamically evolving, right? Like, so it's way more challenging. It's way more sophisticated. So I honestly think that stigma's nearly gone because it's obviously here to stay. And it wasn't really gaming that took off. It was just the way we can spend our free time. And like you said, I think from what I asked you about this question, you are kind of almost addicted to like the competitive environment, right? But you can only be competitive throughout the day so much, right? When it comes to hockey or whatever you're doing during the day, but video gaming kind of steps in and allows you to get more of that fulfillment throughout the night, throughout the morning, or like an afternoon or on a holiday or something like that. almost like constantly. And that's the same way I game too, right? Like
Yep.
I only play competitive games. And I'm addicted to getting better.
Yep.
So
Yeah, for me, it was never like a relaxing thing, and I didn't realize that till later. But like gaming is like, it's very like it's probably very foreign to some people, like where they view it. Like some people really do just use it as a way to separate themselves from the world and just like chill
Yeah.
and have some fun with their friends, and that's totally cool. But for me, that actually gets very boring fast. Like I can do that for a little bit, but I will quickly get bored and seek out something else if it's just casual because yeah, I just think it's just missing that like extra layer of excitement.
Right.
And I think for me the excitement always just comes from like pushing myself in an area that I find fun to express mastery in. You know, it's and I really started to notice that though with League of Legends later on because I stopped playing Call of Duty in junior year of high school because I was like trying to get my life together at that time. I lost a bunch of weight. I started working out a bunch, and I kind of took a break from games because I kind of felt like I needed to do more, and I was like down on myself too. So I just wanted to like take care of myself, and so I stopped playing Call of Duty and started doing other stuff. And I think it wasn't until college, probably like beginning of second year, where I picked up League of Legends well, with a couple of friends, and that just like repeated the cycle. It's like super addicted again. It's the same sort of team. It's a team game, 5-on-5 essentially, and it's got all the addicting elements that COD has. That sports have. There's just so many vectors of skill that you can basically grow on, and the complexity of the game is insane. It's essentially like it's got the complexity of chess, except that it can get even more insane because of the fact that you actually have to like control your character. So there's like a micro skill element instead of just being theoretical based in terms of like how things are in chess. And yeah, I got super addicted to that. But when playing League, and I think it wasn't at the very beginning, but like towards when I was graduating and when I was kind of like at my first job, I started to approach my work life very much like I approached games. Like, because kind of like implicitly, I thought, well, if I was getting really good at sports and at games in this specific manner, and I was also social in those domains, right? Like it was always a team game. So it's not like I wasn't developing social skills and working with people and trying to achieve a common goal with a group of people. Like that's very much what you do at work is you work alongside a bunch of people and you try to achieve a goal. And when I approached my first job, like outside of school, because obviously I worked through school and stuff like that. I very much approached it in the same way, and that's what I began to realize. Like, holy cow! Like, life is very much what it was like in these games for me. Like, it did not feel very different. Like the skills that I developed, and it actually felt like it was an advantage because there's very few. I've noticed that it's very hard in life to know what it's like at like the pinnacle of something. And because it's like a very niche thing that almost you never get to experience, like when you're trying to be the absolute best and you're around people that are trying to do the exact same thing. It's very different from when you're just starting out and you're like amongst like people who are kind of casually enjoying stuff. I don't really know how else to describe that. And I feel like being able to do that within a very um like niche area of life, like in just gaming, right? With other people, was like a very unique advantage because I could easily tie parallels to real life work situations as well. Like for instance, dealing with conflict. Back when I was playing Call of Duty, it's very common, just like it is in sports, to release a player, so to speak, right? Like where they're not performing up to snuff, and you want your team to be better, and so you pick up a different player and you drop that one, right? Well, obviously, that's still a person, and like at the time, like I was like the lead in our team, so like I had to be the one to tell them, right? And it was funny because my mom at the time, like, I don't think she told me right then and there, but she told me later on. She's like, yeah, when you did this, it was actually like very much how like actual firing happens out in the workforce or like an actual critique. Like it was like she's told me I did the hamburger method where I start off with something positive, then I tell them the negative, and then I tell them that I like end with positivity, like saying like, still appreciate you, all this sort of stuff, right? And
Yeah.
she's like, yeah, I just thought that was like super like strange that you were like doing that in a video game.
Yeah. No,
It's
that's an interesting point. Go ahead, Josh.
no, I was just listening through all that, right? It got me thinking, like, I guess I'm trying to figure out what your approach is to picking up new items because I've noticed you're not shy to do that, right?
Hmm.
I know hockey was a former passion, but you got back into that. You picked up and moved. You picked up software development more lately, and it's just interesting because if mastery is kind of a big portion of what you do, right? You would
Hmm.
think that taking on new things might be a little less of something that you would be excited to do.
Hmm.
And I know you said excitement drives you and the competitiveness drives you. So there's probably a couple different things that play together there, but I'm curious, right?
Yeah.
Because you could just pick one thing and master it and spend your whole
Mm.
life probably trying to focus on that, but that's not really the approach you take. So I'm curious how you balance all of that.
Yeah, that's actually a really hard thing that I struggle with quite a bit. Because even for instance, take gaming for an example on it, just in isolation. um when I got really good at these games, I didn't want to play any other games. I was just like, I could be doing this other game, but it's just like I already developed mastery in this one realm and I'm still enjoying it. So in my brain I'm just like, why would I force myself to not have fun when I'm having fun? It just, I actually could never reconcile the two. It just didn't make sense to me. um and I think, and I still kind of do that where it's just like I'm very much in my free time. If I don't enjoy something, I'm trying to be very self-aware. Like I'm not just going to just start doing it because I think it's the right thing to do, so to speak. Like it's, I very much is like try to be self-aware about that, because just because people say like, oh, you game too much, it's like, well, I mean, maybe I'm just a little different in the head, right? Like maybe something's a little off with me, and like that's fine. um but to your point, yeah, I still actually pick up a decent amount of things. But I would say like what usually prompts it is like, I guess, more like big life stuff. So like for instance, moving to South Carolina, it was like kind of an opportunity to like take stock of my life and what I was doing and what I would like to do differently. And so hockey was a like I had two rinks near me up here, so I was like, man, like I really loved hockey as a kid, so like why not like try to look into it. And for the software development sort of stuff and programming, it was more like, I'm in IT. I took my A plus. I had my first job in IT, and I grew a lot within that first job. And I'm in my second job. Well, it's like I kind of want to take my skills to the next level. I feel like I'm just going to stagnate if I don't try and develop myself outside of it. And that's what prompted me to sort of pick up that skill and really invest time into it. So I would say it's normally like I do like something just happens where I just want something different, or like I need something different to achieve a certain goal, and I just do that. And I would say like in terms of, because I think you had asked like how I approach that, like that learning curve you were saying, right?
Hmm. And
Yeah.
what really, I guess, encourages you to do that, right? Like,
Yeah.
why do you step out of that mastery role?
Um, yeah, so in terms of why I do it, it's like I said, I think it's just really like I'm envisioning myself achieving that, and I love that. Like it's the goal that's really driving me at first. It's just like I think it's very powerful, and I definitely, it's always kind of come naturally, but I've always like, if I really want something, I can like see myself doing it. Like, I can see myself writing a piece of software or making my own game, or, playing hockey and like doing all these cool things, even though I can't do them right now. Like I can like visually represent that happening in my mind, and like it feels good. Like, so I'm like living like, oh, okay, like I definitely would love to be doing those things. And for me, it's always been, I always start with the thing, well, if I start with like Call of Duty, for instance, right? Like I start and I'm absolutely trash at the game. Well, I got to the point where I was insanely good at the game, like to the point where I was like playing semi-professional like Call of Duty. Like that's a pretty insane leap. And in my brain, it's like, well, if you can do that in one skill, and you have this vision, this goal, this dream of like being at this level in a different area, there's no reason why you can't get from point A to point Z or whatever, right? It's just a matter of like what the steps are to get there. And I think the advantage that I've had growing up is just that outside of sports and sort of like physical coordination, I was never really naturally gifted at pretty much anything. It was more so like I always had to like figure it out and get better at it. And it kind of ended up becoming a superpower because I kind of like have this like belief now that like I can do whatever I want as long as I really want to do it. And the reason is what's it called? Drawing a blank. It's like, hmm. how do I describe this? It's just here's a good example. I'm not afraid to be a complete dunce, like be an absolute fool, and to make a fool of myself in front of tons of people. Like when I first started skating back here in South Carolina, a perfect example that prevents a lot of people from doing from like learning a skill is they don't want to go out in front of a bunch of people and fall. They don't want to like go look like they don't know what they're doing. They're very uncomfortable being the new person. And I think for me is I just have learned over time that like, well, that's inevitable. You can't avoid that step. Like if you want step B to happen, you got to go through step A, and step A is being an absolute fool. And I kind of extrapolated that further, where the less you hide from how bad you are at something, the faster you will learn, and almost like you learn like better in a sort of sense where like you kind of understand each step as you're going about it. Like I would say like a great instance is, in my last job before this, I think a lot of the times, like you probably could attest to this, Josh. I feel you probably like thought that I said some like really like dumb stuff, or like, I just like made a fool of myself. And
I don't think so. I'm in the same boat as you, right? Even
mm,
even when I feel like I am in that mastery role, I will still purposely sometimes say something to kind of make me.
mm,
We talked about this even in the interviews, right? Trying to diffuse the situation and kind of like put us all on the same level playing field.
yeah,
And it also, I think, encourages other people to not be afraid to be the fool. So and by the way, I wrote that down. Step A being an absolute fool, because I think when we get some merch, that's going to be a coffee mug or
yeah.
something.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, if I could recommend anything that I think I do really well in life, it would be that one thing, because I think that like ego gets in the way of
Well,
everything.
I just
Yeah.
want to clarify. The one thing you do really well in life is being a fool.
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah,
Got
yeah,
it.
exactly.
It's comfortable being a fool.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
okay.
Yeah, true, exactly. That's probably a better way of phrasing it.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I just think people let their ego get in the way, and so it's like they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to be a master, but they also want to start off for the first time. It's like, well, no, you're not gonna be like, sorry, no one. And I think for me, I've always conceptualized it as people wanting a participation trophy, and it's just like, no, you got to acknowledge your level of skill in a particular area, and if you can't do that, then you'll never be a master. Like you'll never get to that area in life, in my honest opinion. And but that doesn't mean you should feel bad about it either. That's the other thing. I think people think that like if you acknowledge that, like for instance, I said I was trash at Call of Duty. That's not me saying I'm a trash person. That's me acknowledging the fact that I was very poor at a particular skill, but that doesn't mean that I can't get better at it. And that doesn't mean that I won't get better at it. Right. And I think that's a really important thing, because I think a lot of times, like if it can lead to like very negative self-talk if you're not careful. But absolutely, like acknowledging where you're at with a particular skill or ability is crucial, because the more delusional you are about what you can achieve, the less accurate you will be with your projections of what you will achieve.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I take Colby as someone who's addicted to the path of mastering something, not necessarily like already being the master at it.
Yeah.
And
Because it's like, so it's like an anime arc where you're just like, you become like, Super Saiyan, like Goku levels. I'm sure a lot of people don't even understand what that means. Or like, it's like you got that like storybook arc of like, you start from zero and you go to hero. Like that's just, when you get to the hero level, there is nothing that feels more amazing like, yeah, like getting to that level where I feel like I'm truly like insanely good at a particular skill feels incredible, because like I think about back to when I started, I'm just like, man, like all that hard work, like all that like to get to here, like is just so fulfilling. I don't know, it's just super
yeah,
addicting.
For
I agree.
sure. Shan, I don't want to take. I don't want to take up all the questions. So you got another one for him?
I had one more. It was again, it was kind of like taking what I know about Colby and trying to like poke him around a little bit and try to like get questions or get answers on why he might be interested in that particular thing or whatsoever. So for me, it's honestly like I know you're into history, right? Like that's
Hmm.
something that also sparks your interest too. So I like to like kind of uncover what kind of leads you to like develop that kind of
Hmm.
like passion or characteristic or something like that. So the question I had, it was a simple one really. It's just what was that like pivotal historical like event or whatever that you've either researched before, studied, looked into, or just came across one day that really um, sparked that interest, and why? And for like a quick example, like for me, um, it's not particularly history. It kind of is, but Greek mythology has always like sparked my interest
Hmm.
heavily, and then it kind of like branched into regular just mythology, whether it be like Nordic or like the Roman gods or like even like the Egyptian gods. Like that stuff is so interesting to me.
Yeah.
That was a pivotal moment for me on even caring for that kind of stuff. Actually, it even like led me into my religious values too. So,
Hmm.
uh, for with that as an example, what like pivotal historic event or something that happened in your life or whatever that sparked that interest in history for you?
I
Yeah.
kind of want I kind of want to tack on to that, which you can hit at the end, but it just made me think. I'd love to know if you could pick one person from history too to like hang out with, to do a
Oh, okay.
podcast with. Who would that be? So
Yeah.
Right
Okay.
on the podcast. There you go.
There you go. All right. Yeah, so my interest in history is actually probably a bit different from what you would expect. So it actually probably starts with my interest in psychology, starting in middle school, and that's mainly because I've dealt with depression a few times in my life, and it's kind of like an ongoing thing. And um, one of the things that was the sort of catalyst, I guess, for why I was struggling with it was I just started to be very aware about life in general from a like abstract point of view, and things that happened in my life and just got me in like a darker place mentally. And you start to wonder, why am I here? Like, what is my purpose? Like, what am I doing here on this earth? And outside of the fact that that can be very dangerous from a mental perspective, in the sense that like it can lead to some very dark thoughts and dark patterns. It also was very fascinating to me that I could even think about that, and trying to search for an answer at the time of like what that really meant, right? There's tons of answers in the world that you can search for and latch onto, but they're like, the thing that I always struggle with is like, well, how do I know they're right? Like, how do I know religion's right? How do I know that religion's right? How do I know, like, how do they know that this is true? And if there isn't, if there isn't a God, and if there isn't like an ultimate purpose, then, what am I doing here? So that's kind of actually what started it. And the reason is, uh, when I got to school and I started studying some of the classes, uh, one of the things that I really latched onto in history was it stemmed from this moment that I was thinking about this, because I started to like figure out like, well, why do we think this? And then a lot of it pointed to the whole, is there a God, is there not a God dilemma? And that moment in history is actually around the 1880s, 1860s, so to speak. It's like a French term that was coined. It's called the fin de siècle, and essentially it just means end of an era. And it's just at this time, there's like a lot of philosophers and thinkers and artists at the time that are also encountering the same dilemma, where there's people actually claiming that God doesn't exist. Nietzsche is a philosopher that is probably the most famous for this, pronouncing that God is dead in one of his books. And I just found that time and period of history super interesting, because it's like what I was dealing with, in my own life in terms of struggle. And I was very curious of how, real people in the world like first encountered this and first dealt with it. I mean, I was starting to think of like, I just found it fascinating how life shattering it must have been to, you grow up, you're extremely religious, and you're suddenly encountering ideas that are completely shattering your worldview of what you think, and how like destructive that can be to your life. And what did they end up doing about that? How did they reconcile those new ideas coming in, and what do they do? And so honestly, it was kind of that
You're talking about
psychological
like
element.
time periods where it was just like this is all we know, and then
Yeah.
they're introduced to like revolution or whatever, or meeting like new cultures where it just throws everything they knew out the door. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify what you meant
Yeah,
by
no,
that.
exactly. And but more specifically like this time in like the 1860s, 1880s, of like Western, so because this is really like a Western thing in terms of
Yeah,
like European history and American history, where people are there. It's kind of like this Judeo-Christian world is coming into contact with a lot of like atheist ideas, essentially, that there really isn't a god. It's because, like, in large part this happens because science is like really explaining things about the world that we didn't know. There's like a lot of people thinking that, like, science can explain the world, if does God really exist, like how can God exist, all those sorts of things. And so there's just more and more people in the world now, especially at like a higher intellectual level, that are struggling with this idea of like, well, if God doesn't exist, morally speaking, what makes things right and wrong? And that's a very hard thing to do without the underlying pitting of religion to assist you with that. And I just found that very interesting. Like I said, just because it was something that I felt like I was dealing with personally as well. And so yeah, that's what prompted the interest. And then it kind of continued from that same round of like, I found it very interesting the more and more I read history, just as like these are real people. This isn't like, I think a lot of people think of history as like dates and famous figures, but these are people like you and me, right? They have emotions, they have feelings, they have failures, they have flaws, they have great traits. They're a real person. And it's so crazy to like look back and watch these people do the insane things that they did and conceptualize them within the context of time that they're in, right? Like if you think about especially the Middle Ages. Who the hell wants to live in the Middle Ages? That place is
Yeah,
freaking
it's
wild.
terrible.
Like,
Yeah,
imagine being a serf. Like that's actually crazy.
yeah.
Like, and all
That's
like
my dream era to live in if I wasn't born now.
oh no,
I
Jesus, yeah, get
there's
me
a
out of
fear
that.
of not having fun. There's a fear of having fun. There's a fear of just everything in the Middle Ages because
Yeah,
anything you could do could
Well,
piss
you
off.
guys know, you've been to my house. I've got that suit of armor. Like that's
yeah,
always been kind of my fantasy as a kid, the knight. Now you're
yeah,
absolutely right. If I was the serf, I probably wouldn't love it
yeah,
as much.
exactly.
But in my
Yeah,
head, of course, I'm either a knight or a king or a prince or
That's what's
something
even
like that.
crazier is if you want to climb the ranks in the night, like as a knight, you have to probably maybe die, like literally, just to get up
yeah.
there. So it's wild. But anyway, not
Yeah,
to.
so I just found it's like super interesting from that perspective. It's just like
Yeah.
when you start to really see things, like actually place yourself in a new world, essentially is what you're doing. And you think about it like, what if I was there? Like, how would that be? Like you'd think, Jesus, like this really helps to frame everything that's going on. And I just found that very interesting. So it was more like it was my own personal struggles that I was able to empathize with a particular time in history, and then from there it kind of extrapolated further into empathizing and really placing myself in other people's shoes throughout history, and it just became really interesting to me. I don't think I don't study history because I like to study great people. It's not really interesting to me. I like flaws more. I like to know all the bad things that people did, all their failures, and the good things that they did. Like I don't just want to read heroisms of people. It's not super interesting to me. It's just that's essentially you're just drawing up a folk hero at that point. It's just a child bedtime story that I just personally don't find super engaging, which fair enough if it is for you. I mean, there's something to be said for that. But yeah, what really drove me is just reading about real people in the world and what they did and what happened to them.
So
And if I
thinking
had to
back
pick
to,
one person,
yeah, I was gonna say, thinking back to that,
oh,
who's your co-host on the
I'm
podcast? You
guessing
can
it
you
would
can
be a
go for two if
philosopher.
you want.
yeah, it would
Guessing
definitely
it would
be a
be a philosopher.
philosopher.
I thought it
Um,
was gonna be Nietzsche and God.
I mean, if I could speak to God, that would be great. That would definitely reassure me of a lot of things. Nietzsche is definitely a very interesting one, but he probably wouldn't be super fun to talk with. Um, but actually, one of the it would probably, and this is actually a really bad one because he's not actually like a good person, but I found his philosophy of phenomenology very, very interesting and captivating for this kind of same reasons, like psychologically speaking, that I was talking about earlier, where phenomenology is this philosophy where you can come to understand the world literally just based on phenomena that happen around you, like real what you experience. Basically, that experience is reality, and that you shouldn't like you don't need to abstract anything else. Like just whatever your experience is reality, and that's how you can form the basis of your philosophy. And I just found that very it was just very interesting from an intellectual perspective. Not that I think it's like right for any particular reason, but so that would be Heidegger, Martin Heidegger, I believe, was the one who did that. Nietzsche would be interesting. Um, I'm trying to think who else would be like super interesting to talk to. Probably like one of the kings in France, I would say. French history is really was also really interesting to me, especially during the revolutionary times, because it was just such a cluster of just crazy shit going on. So it would be really nice to gossip about the courts.
No, that's awesome, man. You definitely picked some people I probably wouldn't have thought of, so that's cool. Giving us an insight into, all things Colby, which is exactly what we were hoping to get out of this.
Yeah.
I got one more that I kind of want to ask you before we wrap
Mhm.
things up, which is what has been your favorite either podcast episode or topic that we have covered in the last 6 months?
Hmm. I gotta think about that for a
Or
sec.
guest, any of those things.
Um. Hmm. I really like the one on imposter syndrome quite a bit, just because, again, it goes back to the whole being comfortable being a fool thing. And I think those two are very like closely related, so I did find that incredibly interesting. Man, that's so tough. That is so tough.
Yeah, that one opened my eyes a lot
Gosh.
and changed.
Um.
Yeah, I think for sure.
Yeah, I would say that one's definitely up there. I think in general, honestly, it's hard to choose because it's not a topic that I love to listen to. It's people's responses to topics and why they think a certain way. That's always been something I've been very drawn to. Is just understanding why people think certain things. Just because I feel like it's a skill that a lot of people really don't develop, and it's a way to like separate your emotions behind what someone's saying and actually understanding why they're coming to that reasoning to begin with. Um, and so I just really like anytime someone has a really counterpoint to what I think is true. Um, so yeah, it's honestly it hasn't really been an episode. It's just kind of how both you guys and our guests have thought about problems in their life. Especially from like the perspective that I'm still like pretty young. I'm 28, and I have a very small realm of experiences in terms of like post college work experience, and like how do you balance your work life and your personal life. Because kind of like post college, you're deciding what you want life to be like for you, and that's always been like an interesting thing. It's just like, if at the end of my life, like, what do I want to say that I did? Like, what do I want to have accomplished? What sort of fun things do I want to have done? Um, what sort of legacy, so to speak, do I want to build, or is that important to leave behind a specific legacy? Do I want a family? How do you balance all these things? And so, especially the stuff like what you guys were kind of talking about, like anytime we're like talking about balancing time, I think is a really big one too, and just kind of like hearing like your guys' perspective on what you think of it. Because what I love about talking with you guys is you're very different from me in a lot of ways, like with how you approach what you're doing in life. Like Shan, like I would never do your business thing, man. Like I don't know how you do that. Like all the stuff you're doing with your businesses on the side, like I think it's super cool. And I know for a fact, well, maybe I shouldn't say no for a fact, but I don't really have that same desire to sort of like run a business. And so it's all like I'm always like fascinated with like your takes on stuff, because that would just be so nerve wracking to me. Like personally, it would just be just super tough. And the same with you, Josh. Like I know like you have like your like side business stuff that you do, and like you always just seem like you're like super on top of it with all like the work stuff that you do. And so it's like I feel like I do way less than you guys on the side, which I'm like, it's good. Like it's good to
No,
like hear
that's just
what's
the imposter
possible.
syndrome. That's honestly just the imposter syndrome. Because
Yeah.
it's the same way. The fact that you just moved states, I'm moving in like 2 streets down in like 2 months, and it has me going crazy. I don't know
Yeah.
how. And that's one thing I've always envied about like some people who are able to just get up and move to a whole different state and not fear all of what like comes along with that. So
Mhm.
that 100% is how I feel about like those kind of challenges and situations. And I think it's just strictly like imposter because I've never gone through it.
Yeah.
So that sounds scary to you, just the same way that it sounds scary to me to like start a new venture in a whole different state.
Yeah.
But I wish I could do it
Yeah.
because
Well,
I've
step
been stuck.
A, be a fool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I
honestly.
did a lot of that when we first got here. Yeah, no, I would say just one last thing too is that I think part of it is just that like I love how different you guys like do things in your life, because it makes me it makes me question whether or not I could be doing things differently. And that's something I always like, because we can all get comfortable and thinking like, oh, like, I'm happy I'm doing what I'm doing. But I always like to like toy around with the idea, like, well, what if I did this? What could happen, right? And I think it's always just interesting to hear like your guys' perspective on that stuff, because it really does challenge me to think like, ooh, like,
It really
do I
does.
want do I want to do that?
It really
Yeah.
does for me too.
No, that's the beauty of the mastermind and the beauty of this pod, and that's why I love it when we do get comments and things like that below, because it gives us even more insight into that. And speaking of comments, if folks want to put those down there and leave it in there, you might even get a chance to be on the show with us, and that'll be another perspective we can bring into this. But it is about that time. So, Colby, I do want to give you an opportunity, man. I know this whole pod has been about getting to know you and getting a little deeper into your background. But, any final thoughts you want to leave us with? Anything that you feel like you want to either
Mm.
expand on or touch on that we didn't ask you that you think people should know?
No, honestly, this was a lot of fun. I don't think, outside of maybe a therapy session, I don't think I've gone this in depth with anyone. Maybe outside of my fiance, that I've really gone into this stuff, and I think it's a lot of fun. I think obviously like people love when they're talking about themselves. Like I think everyone loves that to some degree. And people asking the questions, and I think it's fun to go through your life and kind of like I think you brought up at the beginning, Josh, like kind of like sort of like key moments that sort of shape who you are and why you are who you are. Um, and I think I've always been kind of like intrigued by the fact that gaming has just been such a positive force in my life. And honestly, like I was never like I was pretty sure on that, but this podcast like definitely helps like reinforce that further, because I think like Shan really like with this question like really nailed it on the head. Like if you met me in real life and you heard me talk about games, like I am an absolute like fiend. Like I am just like super obsessed, like to a ridiculous level. And yeah, it really does it really has shaped who I am and how I think about problems, how I solve solutions, how I work with people, etc. So yeah, I just found it was just very interesting to sort of reflect on everything with you guys. So it was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Shannon, any key takeaways from you, sir?
Yeah, no, the more I learn about Colby, I think the more I find myself or find him like really relatable for sure. And especially like the gaming world. So I've recently like in the past couple of weeks reflected on this, that the biggest lesson of 2024 for me has been taking a step back in the areas where I get immediate gratification or immediate fulfillment with like getting better at a particular thing. So like to get more specific in it, I've never really felt more lazier in my life than I am right now. And I think it was a trailing effect of deciding to step back whenever I started my new position as a software engineer this year. I took a small break from the clothing brand, and I took a break. I stopped going to jujitsu, and I promised myself I would game less. And all three of those things, like I've realized, and from hearing like Colby talk about it, I've realized I've taken a dopamine hit in the areas where I just find like that competitive drive, or at least like that journey to mastering something, like really fulfilling. And now that I don't have the fulfillment, it's been a struggle to keep myself motivated.
Hmm.
Um, so it's really good to hear Colby like kind of break down like how he uses that dopamine from gaming like as an advantage in life and how he carries it on. Because I truly believe now that the approach of taking a step back when you're not necessarily overwhelmed can be really detrimental if you're in a position to where you can actually stack on a little bit more and give yourself that challenge, because it's all a domino effect
Hmm.
in reality. And I think Colby has mastered the domino effect of like enjoying that journey of becoming like a master at something, and relating it, or at least like self-reflecting and figuring out how he can apply that in other avenues of his life. So if anything that I've learned from this podcast about Colby is that he's constantly done that, like these exact same steps to drive his motivation and keep his his head focused, honestly. So it was a really good
Well,
session.
yeah. One of the things I loved about today, Colby, was your openness and willingness to kind of be vulnerable and share with us and do the self-reflecting, right? We talk so much about how important self-reflection is and taking time to think and look on the past. And, today we got to do that with you. You kind of took us along on that journey, which was really, really cool to see. Like, this is what kind of contributed to why I am how I am. And this is how I approach things. And here's the reasons why. And, here are the key components that really helped formulate me into the success. And when I say me, I mean you, into the success that you are, right? Which I think was really, really cool. And I appreciate you letting us come on the journey with you. And I look forward to doing this with Shan next. So it's gonna be fun to go into these deep dives. So thanks again, man, for being open and honest and sharing with us today. And it was great just digging in a little bit, and hopefully our listeners feel the same way as they get to know you a little bit better. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on Mastermind for the Masses today. And we look forward to seeing you next week. And hey, make sure you share this with your friends because they're going to want to know all about Colby too. You heard how awesome he is. Why keep that to yourself? All right, everyone. We'll see you next week. So long.